Aloha, everybody. Welcome to Tiki Tuesday Talks, third edition. Excited to have you all here. We have a really important topic that we're addressing on this one. Mariah Kunkel from Pasifika Project talking about Polynesian culture and Tiki and the influence of colonization in this whole mess. So really excited to get into that. We'll jump over and introduce everybody now. As usual, Steve Casey, Aaron Joseph, and then Mariah. You guys want to say hi and let everybody know where you're calling in from?
Hi, all.
Hello.
Aaron, you're muted. You sound good. You look good.
Let's try this again.
All right. Mariah, where are you coming in from?
Los Angeles.
Awesome. Awesome. I wish I was there. Beautiful weather, indeed.
Very warm.
Cool. Very warm. So the topic today is Tiki, the intoxicating flavors of colonization. Mariah's going to talk about Pasifika Project, which is something that she's, I guess, recently kicked off, right?
Right, yeah. It's in its infancy stages right now. So
Awesome.
I'm excited to talk about it with you guys today.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we're really excited to be a big part of this in getting the word out on this thing. And for us, having an event, Tiki by the Sea, which is really a hospitality-driven Tiki event, we think is a super important topic. So we really wanted to get it early on and hopefully often in our discussions that we do here on Tiki Tuesday Talks. So thank you for being here. Super stoked about it. Without further ado, let me just talk about the agenda, then we'll kind of kick into that. So first of all, chat box and questions. If you guys are on Crowdcast, feel free to fire some questions our way. Steve is going to be monitoring that tightly. So anything you have, that we'll save them or we'll interject as we go. Sharing the event within Crowdcast, you can do that, top right corner. Would love for everybody to get the word out on this. Share what we're doing, get some commentary going. We do have a tip jar, so I'll put this up here. So the tip jar is going to be, we're going to do this weekly, which is going to benefit the presenter and/or a cause that they want. So Mariah is going to donate this to the foundation, but Venmo or PayPal at Mariah Kunkel. Feel free to tip if you are in a place to do so. It's going to a good cause. It's much appreciated. We'll flash that a couple more times if anybody has any questions. Presentation, probably about 40 minutes of that. We're going to go over to Aaron Joseph, who's going to rock a cocktail session. And then we have 5 questions with the Tiki fam with a guest alumni who we're going to make an appearance with later. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mariah, and this is the first time we're doing this, so let's see how it goes.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Did that work?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks. Hafa de buenas. First, I would like to acknowledge the original indigenous owners of the land that I'm joining you from, the Tataviam, and their elders past and present. Many thanks also to Tiki by the Sea for having me today, as well as everyone tuning in and everyone who helped promote and share today's talk. I'm also grateful for the tip jar, and I wanted to let everyone know that all funds contributed will be donated to a Guam-based nonprofit media company called Nihi that produces culture-based children's programming to affirm Chamorro identity. So, introduction. My name is Mariah Kunkel. I identify as a Black and Indigenous cisgendered bisexual woman. I was born and raised in California, and I currently reside in Los Angeles. I'm the brand development director for Banas Mezcal Artisanal, and I am a co-founder of Pasifika Project, along with my good friend Sam Jimenez, which is a platform focused on cultivating community among people of oceanic descent within the hospitality and spirits industry, as well as creating opportunities for support and sources of Pasifika education within the industry.
Just to interject, Mariah, real quick, there was a question, what foundation? Can you go over that again?
Sorry? The nonprofit that I'll be donating to?
Right.
It's called Nihi, so it's Nihi with an exclamation point. So it's a Guam-based media company, and they produce like children's sort of cartoons and things like that in the Chamorro language, concerning like legends, things like that, to really affirm the culture.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So through my father, I am Indigenous Chamorro, the original occupants of the Mariana Archipelago in the West Pacific. Through his mother, my Nana, Rosa Lezama Kunkel, who was born and raised on Guahan, or Guam, the largest island in the Marianas. Our family, our clan name is Kichu, and we are from the village of Barrigada. I am Micronesian. I am not Polynesian. We will get into geography later, but quickly, the Marianas are currently divided between two separate territories or colonies that are currently both administered by the United States. You may be familiar with the term Guamanian as a descriptor for people from Guam. This term was created by the US government, and its use is contested, especially among people of Indigenous Chamorro descent, whose ancestors originally lived and moved throughout this archipelago. As of 2018, within the US, Pacific Islanders account for about 1.4 million people, or 0.5% of the total population of the United States. Over half live in Hawaii and California. Please note that Pacific Islanders are not Asian, though we are frequently grouped together.
Hey, Mariah, this is a little hard, I think, for people to see that last chart. Can you just like kind of top line what we're looking at here?
So this outlines the Pacific Islander population in the United States. It outlines the four largest groups, which are Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Chamorro, and Tongan. So the Native Hawaiian population is about 626,000. Samoan is about 200,000. Chamorro is 180,000, and Tongan is about 60,000.
Great, thanks.
Yep. So I want to make it clear that before discussing any further my family and these very personal views that I have about Tiki and colonization, that I make no claim to speak for anyone other than myself. If you're looking for a single definitive opinion, there isn't one. There is no Pacific monolith. There exists a variety of opinions on this subject, and I would advise for you to speak them out as well. I'm here to speak my own truth, and I'm grateful for that opportunity today. I hope that it will be a beginning of an ongoing conversation. Similarly, I'm not willing to debate or justify to anyone the existence of racism, white supremacy, sexism, misogyny, colonialism, nor my experience or perceptions about these subjects. I'm also not here to tell you if you are bad or good, to tattle on who I think is bad or good, to provide you with a checklist on how to be a good person. I'm not here to make you believe anything or make you stop believing anything. I also recognize that Tiki appropriates from a variety of cultures. However, today we'll be focusing primarily on Oceania. With this conversation, I'm hoping to provide most of you with a new set of facts and some history that will hopefully help you reframe your own approach to Tiki. I'm hoping to help you see the direct connection between Tiki and the Western colonization of the Pacific, the harm it perpetuates, and how that stands in conflict with the spirit of hospitality. At its heart, hospitality is meant to extend a feeling of friendship and welcome. There are some of us who do not feel welcomed by Tiki, and while I might be one voice speaking up today, I know that there are others who feel similarly. Sana Maase, many thanks to those within the industry who have been instrumental in ways both large and small on this my path of discovery, connection, mourning, dreaming, as well as activism. Many thanks to Sam Jimenez, Jordis Unga, Tuite Kaho, Ari Deskauskas, and Chalky Tom, as well as so many others both in and outside of the industry. So I have a brief roadmap of our conversation today now that that's out of the way. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of decolonization. Then we're going to move into some basic Pacific geography and ancient history. Then we'll cover the period of contact and colonization. And then we'll examine some themes of colonization, colonialism within Tiki. We'll end with envisioning a way forward. So first, decolonization is an integral part of the ongoing work to dismantle white supremacy within society that has seized public attention in a new and dynamic way as of late. It is important to note that decolonization is not a new term or process, nor is it a term or process that is universally applicable. Decolonization is for colonized people. The process of unsettling is for those who hold power or privilege or even priority as a result of settler colonialism. I invite you to investigate the privileges that you hold with respect to this inquiry. This process begins with an accounting of harm, and for colonized people, a rediscovery and honoring, perhaps even mourning, of the past. This process requires a decentering of the default point of view, which is usually white, cis, hetero, and male, an active rejection of truths and or propagandist history formerly held to be true. This is a painful, ongoing process involving uncomfortable truths and does not reach its natural end when people are made to feel good about themselves. This process seeks solidarity from other Black and Indigenous people of color as our collective liberation from white supremacy, while all very different, are intimately linked. This is our generation's sacred offering, to decolonize for our future descendants, to be a good ancestor, as in the words of Layla Saad. And I'm excited that we are starting this conversation here today together. So
Glad to be here.
Sorry.
Glad to be here with you.
Yes. So we're going to move into some geography and some history. I'd like to ask that you attempt to change your frame of mind a few times while we enter this portion of the discussion. In general, I would say the West knows surprisingly little about this part of the world, the Pacific, and the people who live there. What information you do receive is usually heavily filtered and laden with cliches, informed mostly via vacations, popular culture sources like Disney, the All Blacks and their pregame haka, American football players, old-timey adventure stories like Mutiny on the Bounty, celebrities like The Rock, Jason Momoa, Taika Waititi, and frankly, Tiki Bars. To be clear, when we talk about the Pacific, we are talking about the single largest physical feature on the Earth. It covers nearly 64 million square miles. It covers about 46% of the Earth's water surface and about 32% of its total surface area, making it larger than all of the Earth's land area combined. But because most maps that Americans see split this massive body of water in half and have it hang off the edges while the Americas take center stage, this expanse is reduced to an afterthought, along with its islands and its people. In this ocean, there are 25,000 islands of varying sizes and physical features. However, for most of us who grew up on the mainland, I would like for you to challenge your concept of the relationship between land and sea, which likely places priority on dry land. When thinking of the mighty Pacific and all of the islands that it contains, I ask that you think of this world as a sea of islands as described by scholar Epeli Hau'ofa, rather than tiny islands in a vast sea. In his words, our Pacifica ancestors were connected rather than separated by the sea. Far from being sea-locked people marooned on coral or volcanic tips of land, islanders formed an oceanic community based on voyaging. The world of our ancestors was a large sea full of places to explore, to make their homes in, to breed generations of seafarers like themselves. People raised in this environment were at home on the sea. They played in it as soon as they could walk steadily. They worked in it. They fought on it. They developed great skills for navigating their waters and the spirit to traverse even the few large gaps that separated their island groups. Theirs was a large world in which people and cultures moved and mingled, unhindered by boundaries of the kind erected much later by imperial powers. From one island to another, they sailed to trade and to marry, thereby expanding social networks for greater flows of wealth. They traveled to visit relatives in a wide variety of natural and cultural surroundings, to quench their thirst for adventure, even to fight and dominate. The boundaries that Hau'ofa references are the names that you might already know and that I referenced earlier when introducing myself: Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. These are colonizer terms. Our ancestors knew no such terms, and while arguably somewhat still useful as regional descriptors, they serve to divide us, even amongst ourselves, even today. Entrenched in these terms are obvious sentiments of anti-Blackness. Polynesia was first used in 1756 by the French writer Charles de Broche, originally applied to all of the islands of the Pacific. In 1831, Jules Dumont de Urville proposed a modification to the three regions that you know today during a lecture to the Geographical Society of Paris. Polynesia, or many islands, is the region most familiar to Americans, as Hawaii is within this group. It consists of a triangular area that is bounded by Hawaii to the north Rapa Nui to the east, and Aotearoa, or New Zealand, to the west. Micronesia, the small islands, consists of 4 major groups: the Mariana Islands, the Caroline Islands, the Marshall Islands, and the Gilbert Islands. Guam is the largest island in Micronesia. And then there's Melanesia, the islands of the Black people, which includes Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, and the Solomon Islands. This group is specifically named after the darker complexion of some of its inhabitants. Similar to Ha'afa, I prefer the use of terms like Pasifika, Pacific Islander, and Oceania, which reflects the sentiment that the ocean does not separate us, but rather connects us. Drink of water.
You're doing great.
Thanks. It is generally thought that the prehistoric movement of people across this great sea began sometime around 3000 BCE and originated most likely in Taiwan or the Malay Peninsula, pushing west, establishing original settlements in Melanesia, as well as parts of Micronesia and Polynesia. These seafarers, the Lapita people, were most active between 1600 and 500 BCE and were ancestors of the later cultures of Oceania. The Lapita voyaged thousands of miles in massive seafaring canoes, laden with animals, crops, and family members, using only the sea, sun, and stars to guide their way. Their descendants, the Polynesians, continued to explore and settle the Polynesia region, with Aotearoa and Rapa Nui likely being last by 1200 CE. There's also credible evidence that they reached the Americas based on the appearance of the sweet potato, which is native to the Americas throughout Oceania.
Huh.
Yeah. Our ancestors established complex and advanced cultures, largely based around oral traditions, each with their own cosmologies, belief systems, languages, legends, dance, music, social customs, systems of government, and of morals. Many societies were matrilineal. Many shared commonalities, sometimes mutually intelligible languages, owing to our shared origins and a great love and understanding of our sea of islands and of seafaring. These belief systems were and are outside of Judeo-Christian and Islamic norms, particularly in their understanding of the relationship of man with the natural world and that which is sacred. In many indigenous traditions, the land is literally our ancestor, our relation. The first people are literally born from the land and from the sea. What happens to the environment is understood as intimately connected to what happens to the people who live within it. It is also important to understand that these fully developed, complex societies existed for centuries before Western contact, and that these ways and beliefs were never completely disavowed or lost, but preserved no matter what the cost. To contrast, while our ancestors voyaged thousands of nautical miles, created civilizations and made their home in the Pacific, Europe was largely in the Dark Ages. Pacifica had no European contact until the 1500s. First European contact in Oceania was made by Magellan in the name of Spain in the year 1521. His ship landed in Guam, and he claimed the entire archipelago for Spain. For Spain. And because of a scuffle regarding a small sailboat that the Chamorros helped themselves to after replenishing Magellan's ship and stores, he gave us the glorious gift of naming our archipelago, our beautiful archipelago, Islas de los Ladrones, which literally means the islands of thieves. Magellan also named the sea the Pacific. However, it was also called the Magellan Sea. It was also called Magellan Sea for a very long time as well. He also got himself killed that same year that he gave us this glorious name in the Philippines by Chief Lapu-Lapu for attempting to convert Filipinos to Catholicism. And he's known for being the first person that circumnavigated the globe, when in actuality, he didn't do it, his boat did. The other explorer that you might be familiar with is Captain James Cook. He was British. He sailed 3 voyages in the Pacific in the 1700s. He established first contact with Hawaii in 1778. He charted many regions previously unknown to Westerners, due largely to his Tahitian navigator, Tupaya. He was also killed by Kanaka Maoli, the native inhabitants of Hawaii, for attempting to kidnap the monarch of the island of Hawaii in retribution because someone stole one of his small sailboats. You guys know that theme? Yeah. So let's talk about the typical pattern of Western contact. First, there would be sighting of land. Initial contact would be established between the ship's crew and the reigning monarch. After that period, and the discovery was reported back to Western imperial powers, periodic stops by ships for supplies and the beginnings of trade would be established. Some Europeans might stay. Some natives may depart for work on these ships or for adventure themselves. After that, ships would start to make more frequent stops. Merchants would begin to demand ownership of land and a say in local government. Plantation economies would be set up. Missionaries would arrive. Disease would proliferate, as well as the importation of plantation workers from other countries, other parts of the world, primarily Asia and the Philippines, in Polynesia. In Micronesia, and specifically Guam, there was a huge importation of workers from Mexico, as Guam was the midway point between Veracruz and Manila in the Spanish Empire. So after that point, then imperial powers would get involved into an increasing degree, either leading to colonization or outright overthrow in the case of Hawaii. So settler colonization is best viewed as a structure, not an event, in the words of Patrick Wolfe, meaning that settler colonization is an ongoing system of power that perpetuates the genocide and repression of indigenous people and cultures. It is not a single period in time, nor is it a single action. The erasure of indigenous people is a precondition for settler expropriation of lands and of resources. The settlers then become the rightful inheritors of the land. Viewing colonization as ongoing exposes the continuing modalities at work, preserving the status quo. This includes how colonized people are represented in pop culture and media, and the industries of hospitality and tourism are definitely part of this. Indigenous genocide, hold on, nope, not yet. Indigenous genocide requires the complete disruption of traditional ways of life, the removal and dispossession of people from their ancestral lands, the suppression of language, culture, belief systems, and forced assimilation into settler, usually white culture via conversion to a new religion, compulsory education, labor, or military service. And then the alternative is death for non-compliance. This disappearance is also achieved by the introduction of blood quantum requirements and a complete disregard to how indigenous people perceive of their own identities. Frequently, the descendants of missionaries in the Pacific in the ensuing generations amassed land wealth and transformed the natural native environment with its excellent conditions for crops into plantations. Sugar was predominant, but also many of the flavors and products that you probably associate with the Pacific were imported through this process of maximizing the land for white settler profit. Dole is an excellent example. While pineapple is thought of as a traditional Hawaiian fruit, it's actually native to South America. The Dole family first arrived in Hawaii as missionaries, and their son Sanford served as president of the illegal provisional government after the illegal overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani and the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1893 by a group of US-backed businessmen. He then acted as governor after the illegal annexation of Hawaii by the United States in 1898. Sanford's cousin James Dole arrived in 1899, bought land in Oahu, and built a plantation. He went on to found the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, which is the Dole Food Company we know now today. So perhaps your attitude towards those delicious Dole whips might change a bit. By 1900, nearly all of the Pacific had been seized by imperial powers: the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Japan, and Chile. In the second half of the 1800s, the US acquired several new territories: Guam, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, the Philippines, and a number of Guano Islands. Political cartoons are indicative of the prevailing attitudes towards colonized people in particular. I'm going to apologize in advance for the content of these cartoons. Many of these cartoons involve a strong and paternal Uncle Sam providing schooling, scolding, or supporting childlike colonies, showing them the wonders of white civilization or providing their basic needs because they cannot do so for themselves. The countries are frequently portrayed as unkempt, savage, or in uncivilized or exotic dress. In this one, you can see that Hawaii is not even wearing shoes. They are also frequently brown-skinned or black with animalistic features. Also, have you noticed that in all of these cartoons, Guam is still referred to as the Ladrones, which means that they've had this nickname for approximately 300 years.
Where were a lot of these featured?
In like Puck magazine, just newspapers. It was popular culture at the time. Same place that you would see political cartoons now.
Mm.
So in this first one, entitled School Begins, you see Uncle Sam sort of admonishing these 4 savage-looking children in the front row. They're all brown. They all don't have their hair combed. Like I said, one of them is not wearing shoes. If you can see their sashes, the children are indicated to be the Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. Behind them, the children that are clean, that are white, that are well-behaved, that are reading. On their books are the names California, New Mexico, Texas, indicating states that have sort of fallen in line with white man civilization. Further, you can notice that they have a black child cleaning a window, not even in school, not even grouped with the other children. You also have an Indian child who's reading a book that's upside down. And then peering through the door, you see a small Chinese child, which speaks to expansionist aspirations in China that were prevalent at the time. I don't know if you can read the chalkboard, but I'll read it for you. It says, "The consent of the governed is a good thing in theory, but very rare in fact. England has governed her colonies whether they consented or not. By not waiting for their consent, she has greatly advanced the world's civilization. The US must govern its new territories with or without their consent until they can govern themselves." Continuing on along a similar theme, this is Uncle Sam's picnic. You can see that he has all of the states sort of in the wagon. He's reaching down to 4 small brown, I think they're girls probably. Their sashes indicate them to be the Philippines, Ladrones, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. You can see that Hawaii, also brown, is already on board. The old man in the foreground is supposed to represent the Monroe Doctrine, which justified American expansion on the continent and also elsewhere in the world. He's asking Uncle Sam if he doesn't think that that's too much, and Uncle Sam seems to think that the 2 horses, which are labeled Liberty, and Union, can handle the load. This one's entitled New Faces at the Thanksgiving Dinner. Here you can see Uncle Sam and the woman is Colombia, which represents the American people, carving up a huge turkey for the Ladrones, Philippines, Cuba, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. The quote on the bottom says, "These little shavers seem to like it here. I wonder if I ought to keep them all in the family." Again, you can see the portrayal of each of the countries, especially the Philippines, is especially harsh. And then these last 2 are probably the most difficult for me anyway. This one with Uncle Sam as a strong man, bolstered by the strength of the Army and Navy, holding up the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Cuba, and the Ladrones. You can obviously see the racist sentiment in these imagery, as well as on the right, demonstrating or sort of describing the provisional government situation after the Queen was overthrown. You have Uncle Sam tipping the balance in the favor of the provisional government over a barrel of sugar. And you can just, for yourself, see what this artist and the prevailing sentiment about what Kanaka Maoli was. So you may not think of the US as a current imperial power. You might be surprised to learn that currently the US holds 16 territories, and 5 of them are inhabited. In the Pacific, the UN categorizes both Guam and American Samoa as non-self-governing territories. They are colonies. They are possessions, plain and simple. They are administered by the US Department of the Interior, Office of Insular Affairs. The US Constitution is not fully applied in either territory. They do not have any voting representation in Congress, and the residents cannot vote for president. Colonies exist for 2 main reasons: economic benefit and military positioning for the imperial power, never for the benefit of the people who live in these colonized lands. Indeed, a major factor of the United States' continued colonial presence in the Pacific, here I'm also including Hawaii, is militarization. The Pacific is already home to major military installments, which previously necessitated the disposition of native landholders in the past, but also continues to be an issue today as the military constantly seeks to move personnel, equipment, and weapons. Because of this outsized military presence and its displacement of other industries and job opportunities, the colonies also supply an outsized source of recruits for the military. Many are fighting for a constitution that doesn't even fully apply to them, only to return home to minimal VA benefits in their home territory. The Pacific has also repeatedly served as testing grounds for both nuclear weapons and warfare games. The implication is that these areas are expendable. The Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands had 12 years of nuclear testing rained down upon it. Assured that the land would be still safe to live on, the Marshallese continue to suffer devastating birth defects, high rates of cancer, and other serious health concerns from the extended exposure to radiation, and many have been permanently displaced from their own homeland. The word bikini has long been code for a breezy, tropical sense. You have the bikini bathing suit. SpongeBob lives at Bikini Bottom. However, it remains that the actual bikini bodies are sick and living far away from their own homes. It just doesn't seem like there are enough people in the Marshall Islands for anyone to care. Henry Kissinger famously said of the Marshallese, there are only 90,000 of them out there. Who gives a damn? We have companies today that continue to not care about these atrocities that were visited upon the Marshallese. Among them is Manhattan Project Beer Company, who recently named a line of flavored beers after this spoiled atoll. My own family history includes the military, which is common among Pacific Islander Americans. My father and grandfather served in the Army. My grandfather was stationed in the Pacific throughout his tours of duty and during World War II, and it was how he met my Nana in Guam. Coincidentally, today is Liberation Day in Guam. Most people are familiar with the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, but fewer know that Guam was bombed that very same day, and the US essentially gave it up immediately. Japan took possession of the island. They already had their own colonies throughout the Northern Mariana Islands at the time, and held it until 1944. It was a brutal occupation, and my Nana lived through it. The Second Battle of Guam, which began on July 21st, returned the island to the United States and is commemorated today as Liberation Day. However, I ask you, what does liberation mean when you've been a colony since 1521? In the post-war period, family legend says that my Nana worked as a hula dancer. However, hula is definitely Hawaiian and not Chamorro. My grandfather had a hula girl tattooed on his forearm. They met, and she accompanied him back to the mainland after stopping in Honolulu for a time. And I sometimes wonder at the kind of bars that they visited in Guam and in Honolulu and in San Francisco, where my father was born. Growing up in Los Angeles, I was surrounded by the remnants of the mid-century tiki craze in terms of residential architecture, Trader Vic's in Beverly Hills, and Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, which is sponsored by Dole, by the way. The messages I received about my culture from various media sources at first made me feel somewhat special, exotic, and different, but those feelings don't last. I continue to struggle with my own nostalgia, my own cherished memories of tiki, which is in tension with a more developed recognition of tiki as a later stage modality of settler colonialism. Dan Talapapa McMullen captures many of my mixed feelings in his tome Tiki Manifesto, and if you would indulge me, I'd like to read it for you.
Of course.
Yeah.
By the way, interestingly, I'm based in Las Vegas, and I went to the nuclear bomb testing museum here.
Yeah.
So there was before it moved over there was a lot of it that was happening in the desert in Nevada.
Yeah.
And it's just so insane. Like, it's really crazy.
I think the land.
And then it's totally crazy what was going on over there.
Yeah, the land, I think, where the Manhattan Project, where the bombs were originally built, is also indigenous land. And they tested out there as well. So there's a lot of use of these indigenous land properties because they essentially don't matter to the government. So,
right. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, back to you.
Okay, this is Tiki Manifesto by Dan Talapapa McMullen. Tiki mug, my face, my mother's face, my father's face, my sister's face, tiki mug, tiki mug. White beachcombers in tiki bars drinking zombie cocktails from tiki mugs. The undead, the tiki people, my mother's face, my father's face, the black, brown, and ugly that make customers feel white and beautiful. Tiki mugs, tiki ashtrays, tiki trash cans, tiki kitsch cultures, Tiki Bars in Los Angeles, a tiki porn theater, tiki stores, tiki conventions, a white guy named Kukulele singing an Uga Booga fake Hawaiian. Makes me yearn to hear a true Kanaka Maoli like Kalma Kaiwa Kanaka Ole sing, chant, move his hands, the antidote to tiki bar people who don't listen because tiki don't speak any language, do they? Tiki bars in LA, in Tokyo, in the lands of tiki, Honolulu, Papeete, wherever tourists need a background of black skin, brown skin, ugly faces to feel land of the free, expensive, rich, on vacation, hardworking. With a background of wallpaper, tiki lazy people wallpaper, made from our skins, our faces, our ancestors, our blood. Yes, it's all wrong, but it looks like my great-grandmother's fale, sort of, except she isn't here and it doesn't really. Her fale didn't have a neon sign blinking for one thing. And yes, it looks like Polynesian sculpture, sort of, but not really. But what is the difference? The difference is this. We didn't make it. Or if we did, it was someone desperate, but probably not any of us. Just someone making a buck carving shit for drunks. The difference is this. Our sculpture is beautiful. Tiki kitsch sculpture is ugly. Not because they look so different, but because their shit is supposed to be ugly. Because we are supposed to be ugly. And if we are ugly, then they are beautiful. American or European or Australian or Asian or a lot of us too. And anyone can be beautiful and expensive. As long as tiki kitsch is on the walls looking ugly and cheap. I like going to tiki bars sometimes and hearing island music or doing island karaoke. And there are tiki bars in the islands, sort of, but they're just bars. And I'm here in Los Angeles or anywhere here in the so-called West, which is everywhere. And here, we are tiki mug people. My mother's face, my father's face, my sister's face. Our tiki sculptures are based on our classic carvings, which are abstractions, idealizations of beauty, our beauty. Though in these bars they are, well, you get it. Can I remind us that tiki, whom we call T-E-T-A and T-E-T-E, some call T-E and some call T-E, that tiki was beautiful. Jutting eyebrow, thick lips, wide nose, brown skin in some islands, black skin in some islands, brown, black, deep, thick thighs, jutting eyebrows, thick lips, wide nostrils, breathing, lifting the sky over Samoa, lifting the sky over Tonga, lifting the sky over Viti, lifting the sky over Rapa Nui, lifting the sky over Tahiti, lifting the sky over Hawaii, lifting the sky over Aotearoa, and looking to, paying respects to Papa, to the Chamorro, to Vanuatu, to Kiribati, lifting the 10 heavens above Moana, not your Pacific, but our Moana. And now in tiki bars, Chilean soldiers have drinks from tiki mugs after shooting down Rapa Nui protesters in Rapa Nui, not Easter Island, not Isla de Pascua, but Rapa Nui, whose entire population was kidnapped and sold in slavery to Chilean mines in the 19th century, and whose survivors are shot in the streets of their lands still just a few years ago today in Rapa Nui. And American police drink Mai Tais in Honolulu bars from tiki mugs while Native Hawaiians live homeless on the beaches. And Indonesian settlers drink from tiki mugs in West Papua, where over 100,000 Papuans have been killed seeking freedom after being sold down the river by President Kennedy so that he could build some mines for his rich, cultivated humanitarian friends. And French tourists drink from tiki mugs in Nouvelle Caledonie and Polynesia Française, while native peoples are where? Where are we? In the wallpaper? On the mugs? Woo!
Intense.
Yeah.
Very beautiful. There was a question as to what that was. Maybe you could show it off, the book there that comes from.
Can you see? You can see me, right?
Yep.
Yep. Hui Hui. It's an anthology of essays and art, things like that. I actually I have a reading list on the Pasifika Project website, and this is on it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. All right, so tiki. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So the representations of colonized people are distillations of empirical ideologies and motives. These representations reflect colonized people's values within colonial cultural and economic systems and informs how indigenous people should be treated by society. They can also shape how colonized people feel about themselves. Tiki as a predominant source of information and representations of Pasifika people that are consumed by the general public is properly viewed as part of the ongoing structure of settler colonization. And we're going to talk about Tiki as a celebration of this colonization. So, as we discussed earlier, white settler colonialism is based on the logic of indigenous genocide. Once virtually erased, settlers typically maintain a refractory print of the native counterclaim, which confers legitimacy upon this colonization as they are the legitimate inheritors of this land through this new fused culture. The older culture is deemed ancient and no longer in existence, something like a relic of history, much like ancient Egypt or Rome. The settler use is then frequently referred to as a celebration in honor of ancient times and an ancient people to which they have no real connection to, other than that they are part of the machinations that eliminated them. Frequently, this involves settler adoption or use of indigenous practices, objects such as decor, names, both sacred and not sacred, to confirm themselves as the new natives. It requires the commodification of cultural protocol and regalia, as well as a reduction of culture to kitsch, in the interest of making a profit. This is when culture becomes a costume. And here you can see, this is actually a picture of the YMCA Indian guides. And then on the left is a bunch of young girls in Australia wearing what I think is probably supposed to be Hawaiian attire. However, that's not even the indigenous people that are from the land that they are standing on. So this requires the complete disregard of the fact that there are indigenous people still living. This determines that they've either completely died out or have been so totally assimilated into the dominant culture that this ancient culture is something of the past. So some examples of this celebration that I think Tiki employs, which continues to contribute to colonial erasure, would be the use of Pasifika regalia as costume. For some reason, there exists a disconnect in understanding of Pasifika cultures as indigenous. There's thankfully a growing understanding that Indian or Native American regalia is truly off limits and not a costume. I would love to see that extended also to the regalia of the Pasifika cultures. So there's also, there's also the use of indigenous Pasifika names or language, especially when you consider that these languages were forbidden by colonizers in favor of their own languages, that these languages were beaten from our ancestors' mouths, and in some cases our own names were westernized or simply just taken away, that they're then being adopted by people who have no understanding of that history or of that weight. Next, I have issue with the use of figurative, sacred, or religious art or deities as drinking vessels or mere decor. These mere objects, to some, have a wide range of names, interpretations, and roles across the belief systems of Pasifika cultures. These sacred objects, though definitely beautiful, were never meant for decoration or use on a flyer or a logo. When the Rapa Nui plead for Hoa Hakananaia to be returned by the British Museum, where it has been since 1869, where it was stolen without permission and presented as a trophy to Queen Victoria, I don't know how to explain to you that there is a connection between the sacred moai and these people that you cannot appreciate, that even I cannot appreciate. That's because this relationship was not meant for you or for me to criticize or analyze even, because it's not meant for us. It never was. The moai is a repository of a sacred spirit, a life force. They are not statues to remember ancestors. They literally are the ancestors. So I ask you, what does it mean when you put a drink in a little plastic one? What does it mean when you put your cigarette out in an ashtray that features one? What does it mean when you put sunglasses on one in your flyer? What exactly are you contributing to? So next we'll move to Tiki as a method of installing heteropatriarchy. So throughout history, Indigenous women have been forced to navigate the intersection of intimate contact and white settler colonial culture. This narrative starts in the Pacific with the arrival of Samuel Wallace, who established the first European contact with Tahiti in 1767, and would begin to entrench expectations and myths of sexual freedoms for white men with Indigenous Pasifika women. The women of Tahiti were judged to be nearly white, physically perfect, passive, pleasing, childlike, and nubile, because undoubtedly many of these women were actually children. Allegedly, they contained a mix of innocence and sexuality, and much of this perceived sexuality was obviously projected due to a lack of Christian shame surrounding nudity, which is something not all that hard to understand in the climate of Tahiti, as well as the Tahitian Heba, which is the first dance in Polynesia that Westerners encountered. That's what is depicted here. This is actually an engraving or a drawing from the Wallace expedition. The women in the middle look very white. I don't know what that's all about. And on the left are native men, and on the right are the Samuel Wallace's men. So with the Tahitian Heba, which traditionally has a center of gravity in the pelvis, unlike Western dance at the time, which was centered more around the rib cage. To Westerners, this meant that the Heba must represent simulated sexual acts, as well as these women's desire to have sex with the newly arrived white men. In the minds of colonizers, there's no way that these dances actually communicated complex histories or cultural messages about the profundity of life. A robust sexual economy did eventually develop around this first meeting based on the trade of iron nails for sexual acts with women that completely depleted the ship's reserves and required Captain Wallace to forbid the sailors from completely dismantling the ship in pursuit of more nails. This initial exchange directly impacted how Tahitians, and Tahitian women in particular, received future ships to their islands. It also impacted Western expectations in future encounters with other islands. Women were now fully expected as part of the refreshments for men on the ships, and almost all women were available for the right price. It also impacted the sexual health of the islands, as sailors brought with them venereal disease, though Westerners frequently cast Pacifica women as the source.
It's pretty amazing that the timing of this and this specific aspect of this topic, because have you seen this movie, The Bounty?
Nope. Is it based on the Bounty?
The HMS Bounty in that story, it's actually like a really star-studded movie. It's pretty old. Mel Gibson. I literally saw it last night, and it shows this interaction. Like, there's a discussion at the end about the dancing and how it was unbelievable that the sailors were shown this form of dancing, which is so sexualized. Like, they're clearly shown as like incredibly excited that these colonizers are arriving on this boat, and it's just such a blessing to them that they would be there, that they're kind of, the women are throwing themselves at the sailors. I mean, it's pretty disgusting. But it's pretty interesting, because I think it's literally what you're describing is what's shown in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the case of Tahiti, when later ships arrived in Tahiti, the first contact sort of established a bar, or a code of conduct that was then later embellished upon. But yeah, the Bounty, there's a whole bunch of problems with Pitcairn Island and the Bounty crew and all of that, as well. That we want the sexual abuse cases and the abduction of women as well. So yeah, we won't get into that. We can save that for another time.
Right. Fair enough.
The Wallace expedition would cast Tahitian women explicitly sexual terms that would continue to draw Western men to the Pacific, and Tahiti especially, with the expectation of consequence-free sexual liaisons with Pacifica women. Pacifica cultures, like others outside of the Judeo-Christian traditions, celebrated sexuality and viewed it as fluid, a positive life force. Western stereotypes reduced Pacific women to one dimension, a passive sexuality that revolved around pleasing white men. Colonized female sexuality was restructured to meet the sexual needs of white men. Her value was in her ability to satisfy her partner. Her own needs, desires, and expectations were completely subordinated. The ever-present hula girl at Tiki Bars has her beginnings in these myths. As filtered through later white settler colonial aspirations, making her less indigenous and more white, she simultaneously represents the gateway to the creation of the new whitened race in the Pacific through heterosexual appropriation, as well as serving as a totem of assured male dominance. She is always available, always willing, always sexual. She is always mostly nude. She is always young. She is always smiling. She continues to reduce Pacifica women to the same narrow stereotypes that began in the 1700s. She continues to affect how Pacifica women, like myself, are viewed. she definitely affected how my nana was viewed, perhaps even by my grandfather with that hula girl that he had tattooed on his forearm. And then there's just blatant racism. Pacifica cultures are not alone in that messaging from the mainstream about Pacifica has leaned on racist tropes, as we saw in the earlier political cartoons. However, within Tiki circles, there still seems to be a general acceptance and even adulation of some particularly problematic imagery and objects. Personally, I am not sure how shit like the Menahune from Trader Vic's and Mr. Bali High are still not seen to be as racist as Mammy cookie jars and the Fu Manchu mugs, because similar to the themes that I discussed in McMullen's poem, I understand that these are representations of real people who happen to be my family, that this is what other people think of people like me or what my family might look like. And I have to say that if I see this in your bar, I do not feel welcome at all. I feel like shit.
I think that's a really important point here, is to kind of talk about, what are the things that truly need to be discarded immediately within, this context, right? And this resurgence of Tiki as a cocktail movement, the fact that it's interacting in bars. And I think, to me, that's a really tangible, understandable element. Like, it's a representation. It has no business being there, you know? So I think that's a very easy takeaway from this, in terms of, if you're instituting a Tiki program using mugs of any sort, et cetera, like, maybe it should be a no-brainer, but maybe it always isn't,
Yeah, and I think to a certain degree, there's people that are creating new Tiki programs now. That's one thing, but the gray market, or whatever it is, the market for these like collectible objects still is going on strong. Still is high price, so there's still a lot of value that certain enthusiasts place on these objects that breaks my heart. So,
Got it.
So what should we do about it? What's the way forward for Tiki? So this is a quote from Maori scholar Dr. Linda Tuhiwai Smith. The intellectual project of decolonizing has to set out ways to proceed through a colonizing world. It needs a radical compassion that reaches out, that seeks collaboration, that is open to possibilities that can only be imagined as other things fall into place. So what do we do now? I have to confess that my personal dream when it comes to Tiki is that we decide collectively that it shouldn't exist anymore, that we stop calling it Tiki, and that we figure out something altogether new. Why? Because frankly, I am no longer able to separate the colonizer fantasy from the escapism. It essentially is a vacation for settler colonizers. People like me exist in the service of this fantasy to either be a servant or a sex receptacle. Because this vacation is premised on a genocide of my ancestors, and it requires my relations to dance on their graves so that they might eat. Because this experience tastes like flavors that were imported from other lands to be cultivated on plantations that enslaved my people. Because these drinks have names that either break my heart or use the sacred names of deities that colonizers tried to make us forget. Because this kaleidoscope fun house mirror makes our men into savages, our women into whores, and our culture into knickknacks that you can buy at the ABC store. So this is where you guys come in. I'm hoping that the more that we can hold space for conversations like this, the more that we can work together, the closer that we can get to these collaborative possibilities that Dr. Smith speaks of. That together we can create welcoming, hospitable places, that we can find opportunities to come together and share our culture rather than have outsiders take it or just make ugly, rough approximations of it to turn a profit. I'm hoping that you will consider supporting these cultures that you profess to admire. Here are some actions that you can take now. You've heard my opinion today. I'd love for you to search out other Pasifika voices who want to share their opinion with you. Ask permission first. Listen to them and help amplify them. There aren't many of us. Remember, that's only 0.5% of the population in the US, so we do need your help. Our individual experiences with colonization vary widely, and it is valuable to your understanding to broaden your exposure. I would also ask, especially of other Black and Indigenous people of color, to have our backs. Our collective liberation from colonization, while all very different, are intimately linked. I would challenge you to taste the actual flavors of Oceania and experience our culture from our own cultural practitioners. I would ask that you read and research, prioritizing primary sources from Indigenous authors, because what is notable about much of the research and fiction in the mainstream is the silence of Indigenous voices. And for every work that you read produced by a man, try to read two that were produced by women. Read our poetry, read our fiction, read our creation stories. I'd also love to see support of movements and charitable organizations that address the pressing needs of this region, with your Tiki Night fundraising, with your happy hours, when you launch a new product or a book. The Pacific is still a thoroughly colonized region of the world. It is dominated by militarization and suffers more than its fair share of the climate change crisis. Issues of sovereignty and self-determination remain open questions. Sacred lands like Mauna Kea and Retidian continue to be in danger of encroachment and desecration by imperial powers. The Runit Dome in the Marshall Islands continues to slowly seep nuclear waste into the Pacific. I would hope that Tiki enthusiasts would love and support real, multi-dimensional Pacifica people and the issues that impact them, rather than simply glorify narrow stereotypes that Tiki has defined us by. I will leave you with the words of Apele Haofa. We should not be defined by the smallness of our islands, but by the greatness of our oceans. We are the sea. We are the ocean. Oceania is us. We must wake up to this ancient truth and together overturn all hegemonic views that aim ultimately to confine us again, physically and psychologically. It is time to create things for ourselves, to create established standards of excellence that match those of our ancestors. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. How do I change this? Do I did you get it?
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much. I mean, for us, from a Tiki by the Sea perspective, I think it's hugely important for us to have this conversation to help us consider ways we can evolve within this, to make sure that we're sharing these voices and this history. I mean, there's so much history that I honestly didn't know coming out of that. You know, tough to see some of it, but I think this is a good start to that conversation. I think we need to have more of this in what we're doing. You know, a lot of what we do is about fun, and that's cool and all, but there's so much more there. So great presentation. Thanks for working with the weird tech. I think you did a good job, all things considered. I don't know if we have time for any more questions, but maybe we'll collect them and send them your way. I'll do another plug for the donation aspect with the tip jar. You guys can see it. Fetty put a link within Crowdcast, so that's hugely appreciated. And then I think we do, as we always do, we do need to make a cocktail. So let's get Aaron back up in here, and Steve as well. Hey guys! Oh, looking good.
Look great.
So moving on to a little bit of a cocktail portion of this. Let me see if this adds. Okay. Aaron, do you want to kind of talk about this? Aaron / Mariah, do you want to talk about this? Because this is a collaboration between you guys to come up with this drink that, you know, maybe fits a little bit of what we're doing here.
I mean, I put myself entirely in Aaron's hands. I trust his, instincts and his creativity. So I think we just talked about how some of the flavors that I enjoyed and that I just wanted it to be, refreshing. So I'll let Aaron do it.
Fair enough.
No.
Aaron, you want to break this down for us?
This is a cocktail that I was inspired by a conversation with Mariah, and also inspired by my childhood spent in Hawaii. These flavors are very, very familiar to me because it was just basically everything was accessible. But it reminds me of a cocktail that we tourists or people of the island would normally drink on joyous or just great occasions. And it was, we called it POG, which stands for Passion, Orange, and Guava. And so we decided to take those flavors, and talking to Mariah, she wanted something tropical, refreshing, but I wanted to incorporate some kind of balance, and then all ingredients that reminded me of my time in some of the culture that I was exposed to in Hawaii. So And we came up with this cocktail called Nectar of Ohana. And the name means that much more to me because I was very, very fortunate to have great interaction with my childhood there, with numerous cultures. And it just felt like everybody had this great sense of aloha. And I basically was invited to everyone's home and made feel part of their family. And Ohana means family in Hawaii. So that's what this cocktail is supposed to have, that destination and that feel, and hence the name for the inspiration.
So if you guys want to make this cocktail along with Aaron, he's going to walk you through it. We would encourage you to post it. We're going to do some prizing around people who post up these drinks, but really want to keep a cocktail engagement with what we're doing here. So we'll kick it over to you, Aaron, to walk us through this drink.
All right. We'll start with a little bit of ice down our glass. And then I'll start with one of my favorite flavors in the world, guava juice. And we're at a full ounce of that to our shaker. Sorry, let me move that out the way so you can see me pour it. And then next we have passion fruit juice, and we'll add a half ounce of that. Next is going to be fresh squeezed orange juice, another half ounce. Fresh squeezed lemon juice. I don't know if this has enough ingredients at all, but it came out really well. And then finally to add, a unique.
It's easy.
Yeah, we'll just blend all these together and call this Aaron's Mix. And then finally, to tie it all together, to give it some depth and some spice, I got some coffee from Kona, and it is flavored with a little bit of macadamia nut. We brewed that and turned that into a syrup, and we'll add 3/4 of an ounce of that as well. And then finally,
I got to cut out to Mariah's dog real quick. Hold on.
oh,
That's adorable.
You're always listening by the sea, though. So
yes,
Yeah.
I remember that flavor.
We'll be back to that. All right, back to you, Aaron.
Back to the dog. And then finally, some delicious cachaça from this gentleman in Las Vegas. I mean, we can talk about it later, but we're going to start with our Avoir cachaça product expression. We're going to go full ounce of that. And then to add onto those great flavors, the Amburana, which has some great baking spices, again, has some great vegetable notes. To add another layer of depth, we're going to use the Avoir cachaça Amburana expression and a full ounce of that.
Hey, we got a question here, Aaron.
Yes.
If we only have passion fruit and guava, is there an alternative recipe? Also, you look fluffy. I like it.
Yes. Just make sure you take the lemon juice, and that's a key component to acid. With the guava and the passion fruit, depending on what you're using, they tend to have a little bit of residual sweetness to them. So we're using the lemon to add some brightness and some acidity to your beverage. And also the coffee does add a little bit of acid to it as well. So I would say if you can skip the orange and then keep the lemon in the coffee syrup, you still have a great balance of flavors.
Cool.
All right, add ice and give it a nice little shake. And then I'm going to use my Darth Vader strainer. Strain it into a column.
Love that. Big fan. Here's another comment. Corona beard is fierce.
Hashtag beards are the new six-pack.
Another question, sorry. Is there a recipe for the coffee syrup?
The coffee syrup, literally brew a pot of coffee and 1-to-1 coffee to sugar, and you have your coffee syrup.
Even I can do that.
So add some fresh mint, a little bit of lime. And then, for all effects, we're going to torch some cinnamon. In true home fashion, I have a lighter instead of an actual torch. And then just want to get it to a point where it's got a little bit of smoke. And then place that in your beverage. And now you have the Nectar of Ohana.
I need one of those.
I know a guy. We can work that out, Pete.
I'll give you my mailing address.
No problem.
Very good, very good. But reminder, post that up if you guys make it at home, even if you make an iteration. We're excited to share drinks with you guys, see what's out there, put it back into the universe.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Aaron. We're going to jump over to 5 questions.
There we go.
Roy Clark, your time is here. Patiently waiting.
What's up, y'all?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm sipping on some balsamo, so I'm doing okay.
Nice.
Also a Mai Tai with agua prata and ambarana, so double fisting. Yeah.
You want to give us a little context for who you are?
Yeah, I'm Roy Clark. I am the bartender and GM of a bar called the Haberdasher in Mobile, Alabama, down here on the coast. I was on Tiki by the Sea Wave 1 in 2018. We like to call it the chill wave because it was cold as shit, even in June. What?
That was really fucking cool.
Yeah, it was. Steva, I remember this, like Steva in her email, like said, bring a hoodie, bring a hoodie, bring a hoodie. And there were so many people that didn't bring a hoodie. I was one of the ones that did. But anyway, also I had the privilege to attend the first Tiki by the Sea alumni event down at the Hukalau in Fort Lauderdale. So, yep, that's me.
Yeah, hopefully whatever lets us get together.
Yeah, that was fantastic. So,
thank you. All right, we got 5 questions for you. Hard-hitting questions. You ready to go?
Let's do it.
Here we go. Favorite cocktail?
Oh, 1944 Mai Tai, all the way, baby.
All right, nice. Favorite Tiki by the Sea memory?
I think on the alumni event, our excursion to the Mai Kai was, kind of a bucket list kind of thing. So that's what I think of when I think about Tiki by the Sea. Also, going to the boardwalk in Wildwood.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
All right, describe Steva Casey.
Steva, the best hugger in the world.
Oh,
That's very sweet of you.
Good. That's good. We got to show everybody now. Hi, Steva.
Virtual hug.
Oh, yeah. I look forward to giving real hugs in the future.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait.
All right. Weirdest Wildwood experience.
Weirdest? Ooh. The instead of being iced with Smirnoff, we did the being iced with the slow and low canned cocktails. That was a terrible idea, but it was hilarious and fun.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, awful.
All right, tell us about the Haberdasher.
The Haberdasher, we're a craft cocktail and craft beer bar in Mobile, Alabama. That says it all. We're also working on a second bar on the second story of our building, which is going to be a nautically themed rum bar. So,
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
How are you going to sneak all that good booze into the state of Alabama?
Say that again.
How are you going to get that good booze in Alabama?
Oh, well, it takes a lot of work and a lot of finagling, but we've come a long way in the state of Alabama. So,
fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, we
Excellent.
got it.
Thank you for being here, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
What do you got?
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to.
Yeah, same.
All right. Next week, Chad Mustafer. Tiki Bars alumni, bartender, author of amazing book, Bringing the Funk in Cocktails. Same time, same place.
Huh?
Love to see everybody. 3 Eastern, 12 Pacific. We'll throw everybody back on here. Mariah, thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm sure there are questions. We will try and get them out to you. This will definitely, a couple people asked, this will live on our Facebook page and our YouTube, which is new. So you guys can rewatch it, digest it. Pasifika Project, if it's in the means that you have, please donate. It's to a good cause. Super excited to continue hosting these discussions.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.